Hello, dear ones. I just wanted to share in this next short reflection about our trust in man versus our trust in God and in our Messiah, Jesus Christ. So, we spoke about the fall, we spoke about God's grace in the midst of the fall of Adam and Eve, of mankind. But here I'd like to look at a promise that God gave and how that promise was not fulfilled and how that promise was fulfilled. So if we look at Genesis 3:15, this is actually God speaking to the serpent, but Adam and Eve are present, no doubt. And God says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, or your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So, serpent aside, let's imagine Eve here, or Adam and Eve. So, here they receive a promise of a child. So, a human being, a man specifically, born of the woman, the seed of the woman, and it says that he shall bruise the enemy's head. Now, no people had been born up to this point from what it looks like. So this means that Adam and Eve are now looking forward to when they have their children, presumably their first male child, he is going to be the one, the seed of the woman, that is going to bruise the head of the serpent. And so we know that this is probably what they were thinking, specifically what Eve was thinking, because in Genesis 4, it says, Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, their first child, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And so this I have gotten a man can also be translated, depending on how you look at it, as I have gotten the man with the help of the Lord. So here Eve, for the first time in human history, gives birth. And she gives birth to this male child. And she looks at him and she says, This is my seed. This is the seed that God promised. And the seed will bruise the head of the enemy. This is my deliverer. This is my Messiah, right? The chosen one. And then what do we see throughout chapter 4 about the journey of Cain? Cain is the representation of the flesh. Unlike Abel, his brother, who actually acts in faith, Cain acts out of self-righteousness, out of pride, and everything he does actually resists God and just fully relies on himself. In fact, as I was reading chapter 4 of Genesis, I was thinking, wow, Cain is like the first Pharisee, if we're talking about the Pharisees of Jesus' time. He's so self-reliant, so self-righteous, and so jealous of the one who gets favor while walking by faith. And so let's imagine Eve looking at this little baby boy, the firstborn that she bore into the world, Cain, and she sees a Messiah, the Messiah. But in fact, in her hands, she's holding a murderer. The one that she thinks will bring salvation ends up being actually the first human to kill another human, second generation of humanity. He brings murder and that kind of violent death into this world. So, what can we learn from this? So many things about walking by faith, not in the flesh, and so forth. But I just really want to paint this contrast that stood out to me as I was reading. Wow, she's thinking he's the Messiah, the Savior, but he's actually the murderer. And if we remove ourselves a little bit away from Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, and just think of these as types and foreshadowings, we see here Eve putting her trust in man. We see her putting her trust in the flesh, in a person who is of flesh, instead of a person who we know is Jesus Christ, who is the promised Messiah, the promised Savior, who is born of the Spirit. Notice the promise is the seed of the woman, not actually seed of woman and man, right? And that's the first foreshadowing of the virgin birth, actually. But that aside, which is such a neat insight, we see here she's putting trust in man instead of putting trust in God. So whoever it is that you might be tempted to look to for your salvation, for your fulfillment, for victory over the enemy, whether it's your spouse, your friend, your boyfriend, girlfriend, maybe your government or your church leaders, or whoever it is, of course yourself. This story of Eve's disappointment, of Messiah murderer revelation, I think serves to teach us this lesson, not to put trust in man, but to put trust only in the one Messiah, the true promised one, who walks by the Spirit and who does crush the head of the enemy in your life and in my life, Jesus Christ.